What's going on, everybody? My name is Nick.
My name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive. And we are in a new series. Not really a series. I guess it's kind of a one-off here.
It is a one-off.
But it's, the title of it was Trending, where we're talking about how to organize our priorities and stuff like that. So
that's right.
Let's get into it. Let's just go straight in.
Let's go.
All right, Dave, how was your weekend? You had a busy one or a pretty slow one?
How was my weekend? We had a lot of football.
Yeah.
Watched a lot of football on Saturday. And
as you should. It's Saturday.
Yeah. I had a church meeting, a district-wide meeting yesterday afternoon. It was a good weekend. Church was good. Had a great day in worship yesterday.
Yeah, it was.
Had a great meeting with the young adults after church.
Yeah, that was.
A lot of folks there. So, so I'm good.
Doing good.
I'm good. How are you?
Busy. I feel like we're just kind of running around. Rachel had an event with the job that she's doing with ISF. So they were at a campsite doing an event. So we went out there and supported for a little while. I was single dadding, taking kids to friends' houses and having them clean and moving. It was crazy.
But I saw you single dadding yesterday at church. So
yeah.
Good job.
That's how it goes. Sometimes you just gotta keep it moving. But without further ado, let's just jump straight in.
Sure.
Talk about trending.
All right. So I use this metaphor of Twitter. You use Twitter, right?
Yeah, I do.
X. Twitter.
I use X.
Yeah, which is like, we have time to talk about that here. I don't think Elon Musk understood the whole branding thing of Twitter. This is just my side commentary.
Yeah.
Because Twitter, they were short little statements. They were like little bird tweets.
Yep.
And so it was tweet. And so that brand, it was so entrenched. And now people will say Twitter or X, which was Twitter.
Everybody still says Twitter. Everybody still calls it Twitter. And then they have to go, oh, I mean X or whatever.
That brand was so... it was a good brand and was so entrenched in everything. I can't see messing with it.
I loved Twitter when it was Twitter. I really liked it when it was like you get the 140 characters.
140 characters.
Because it was the quick hits. You know what I mean? Of like, I'd get all my sports information I needed and real quick. And now, like, it's gotten, oh, well, if you're a premium member or you have the check marks, you get a little bit more to say. And then people started making these long threads. And it was like, no, I'm here for the quick hits. That's what I really like.
I still am. So anyway, but the idea around that was that on Twitter, when you search, it'll give the categories that are trending.
Correct.
On Twitter. And so that's always been fascinating to me to see what was trending on Twitter.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's been important things.
Right.
And sometimes you can see what people were really is on people's mind and what people quote unquote would think was important based on the number of
likes,
hits, likes, whatever.
Yep.
And so, and sometimes it's just silly, stupid stuff. And sometimes people artificially inflate because they'll try to do something to get something to trend on Twitter. So, you can't always depend on that. But my thing was that in using that was what is trending in our lives? What are the things that are most important in our lives, and are they what we truly would say would be our priorities?
Yeah.
Because lots of times where we're spending a lot of our time, where we're spending a lot of our money, where we're doing a lot of emphasis and putting a lot of energy into, they would not fit into what we would say would be our priorities.
Sure.
And so how do we do better? How do we rearrange our lives to do that? And so, I use the example because I've got to start getting in shape. I used to be more of a person who would go to the gym and did a lot of hiking and stuff, but, I have just got into this pattern of just being lazy and not exercising and eating terrible. And so, but if you were to ask me if it was a priority for me, I would say, that's a priority. Exercise is a priority.
Yeah.
But I never...
You feel like it should be on there.
It should be on there, but it's not. And so, I would always use the excuse of, there's not enough time. But the fact is you make the time for things that are important to you, that are priorities.
Yeah.
If it were a priority, you're going to make time for it.
And there are seasons of life for sure where time is scarce and hard to find. But for a majority of the time, I think we use time as an excuse of like, I just don't have any left. But I liked your illustration yesterday with the TV, with the commercials or
Right.
whatever. Like, that's how you save some time. And you're like, or
Right.
just don't watch
Yeah.
the TV at all.
Yeah, if you didn't hear my sermon yesterday, I ran across this thing. It's one of those life hack websites that they put out stuff on social media, and it was like 10 time saving things that you can do to free up time to reach your priorities. So I can't remember exactly how it was worded, but something like that. I was going like, okay, that could work with the sermon. So I looked at it, and they were also ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the most ridiculous one was when you're planning, going somewhere, you're planning all your routes where you have to drive and stuff, plan it so that you are making mostly right-hand turns, because when you have to take a left-hand turn, and we've all been there, and there's people, it
You
can
got to
take
wait
up time. And so I just think like, that seems like it would take more time to think through, and that seems a little
Yeah, I feel like you'd have to go so far out of the way to make it happen.
right. But the other one, which is a good suggestion in some ways, and that is because I know my brother, when he is watching like a football game or something, he'll DVR it, but he won't start watching it for like an hour, so that he doesn't have to watch the commercials. And
Sure.
But the idea behind that was that you could save 8 minutes every 30 minutes if you do that. If you're watching network TV, that's wrong, because if you're streaming,
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
that doesn't matter.
They'll put it on.
But yeah, so my solution for that is just don't watch as much TV.
Yeah.
If it's a priority, if we start really prioritizing things, even though you're right, there are seasons in our life.
Yeah.
If we start prioritizing things, you'll be surprised, how much time we are wasting on things that we could be spending on what we say are really important.
Sure.
I believe.
Yeah. And it's funny how it kind of even goes back to what we had been talking about with tithing and using our resources and stuff like that is how are we allocating this time that we begin? We know we have this 24 hours. We know that we're supposed to spend 8 to 9 of that asleep, so what are we doing with the rest of that time that is, benefiting us or our family or our friends? You know what I mean? Like, how are we using it to the best of our ability?
Sure, for sure. And, it wasn't intentionally to be a sermon on time management.
Sure.
But it was to be like looking at what some things that Jesus told us about discipleship, and particularly about seeking first God's kingdom and God's righteousness and everything else. So are we putting Christ first in our life? And how are we doing that? Because, most people would say church is important to them, or most people in our community would say church, my spiritual life, that is a high priority in my life. But my question would be, is it trending? If you took a real honest look at your checkbook, if you took a real honest look at your calendar, does that reflect how high priority that is for you? Are you nurturing your soul in your spiritual life and trying to find ways? Because there are distractions that come along.
Sure.
And, another point I made in this sermon is that I find that what I get, the distractions that come are and take up my time are usually not near as important as what I'm being distracted from. And so if I'm trying to change my ways or trying to work on whatever that's important that I put as a priority, the distractions that are coming along are usually not as important of the thing I'm being distracted away from. And so, how do we set those boundaries and parameters around our lives to make sure that the things that we say are true and essential and important are getting done?
Yeah. It's interesting when you really kind of take the time to make sure that these pieces are being poured into. There are like trackers or places of evidence that you can find that shows like, oh yeah, this is something that has been meaningful to me. And I have to catch myself as I reflect personally about stuff like this. Is I do play video games, and I could play video games if I had the time. I could do it 3 or 4 hours at a time. You know what I mean? But I also have to clean my house, and I also want to be, in my spiritual life. I want to be praying, and I want to be reading and stuff like that. And it's finding that balance in my life of how can I put all of these things that are important and make them happen.
Yeah, and that's a very important point. It's not saying that you spend 24 hours a day, reading your Bible.
Right.
But if you say it's a priority and you're spending a disproportionate amount of time watching TV or playing video games, and I've been there. I haven't played video games lately, but I can remember like being up almost all night playing a video game.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff that can happen and can eat away from us getting to the really, best things in our life.
Yeah.
Not that it wasn't fun and not that it was even, there's nothing inherently bad about it. It's
everything in moderation. Like they would tell you on a diet, you should only have a certain amount of a lot of things. You know what I mean?
Right. And so, as a pastor preaching a sermon, I feel pretty committed to that. We need to begin with what is our life in Christ looking like?
Yeah.
Jesus said, seek ye first the kingdom of God and all these other things. And so if we get that in order, it seems like all those other things are going to fall in line. There's going to be time for them. One of the things that I put up early in the sermon was that like we don't organize our life by saving time. We organize our life. We decide what life we want to have, and then the time will take care of itself if it's really truly become a priority. And so that lays over that verse about seeking first very well.
Right.
If we have determined that this is going to be then all the other things, all the other time and all the other commitments and things will, I feel, fall in line. I think we have to continuously be checking ourselves.
Yes.
I just don't think it's something that we do, once and that's it.
Right.
I think it's always coming back to that. Like, what are the priorities in my life? Setting those goals, having those disciplines that help us along the way.
Well, and I think that's an important thing too, is to have that reminder. And it's a lot of the reason why, places, especially gyms and stuff like that, they have the, not the, I don't know the right word, but they have this idea that if you do it with somebody else, that you're more likely to keep it up. And I think that's the importance of a good accountability partner, is to help you keep some of the priorities you have, your priorities, to really be honest and open with somebody that you can check in with and that can go, hey, I see that maybe your spiritual life has taken a back seat to everything else in the world right now, or to everything else going on. How can we help you reorient that a little?
Part of being discipled.
Yeah.
As disciples, who's discipling us? Who are we discipling? And that's part of the whole mentoring of that. And I think that's important to be held accountable. And it can help us stay more focused on what we are seeking to have as our priorities.
Right.
With that. And so it comes back down to, something that we're going to be doing this week during our worship service, and that has to do with our pledge cards for this year. And we have used that verse, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Right.
And so I would say to people, even as we're turning in our pledge cards, that it's a good time to be looking at other places in your life and making your priorities and goals and that sort of thing around that. There is something about writing it down.
Yeah.
And the way we do pledge cards here, it's not a bill. It's not something, you don't have to fill one out.
Yeah.
And, no one, we don't even have a real super accountability, like, oh, you're way behind on your pledge or whatever. We don't do that here.
Yep.
It's really between the person and God. But in that, something about writing it down, that act of doing it, makes us stick more to that commitment.
Sure.
And so we could start with our finances with that, but there's other things as well. But I'm going to spend these many hours in service, or I'm going to spend these many hours, and I'm going to next year I'm going to be in a Bible study. I wasn't in one this year. Those sort of things. Yeah. I think this is a good season to be doing that, I think.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, and it kind of comes from something that we both had the opportunity to do last week. Is we were on a panel where people asked us questions, and I was like, this might be a good space to start asking some questions that maybe they would ask. And as we're talking about prioritizing, why, in your opinion, why is it important to have the church and your faith be one of the main priorities in your life?
well, I think faith
Yeah.
is important. I mean, I believe that that's the most important thing, our life in Christ. I think Jesus wants us to have the most abundant, best possible life.
Yeah.
And a part of that is church, because we were meant to be in community with one another. We were meant to worship with one another. There's so many benefits that come from being a church. Do you have to go to church to be a Christian? No.
Yeah.
You know, can you grow as a spiritual person without going to church? I'm sure you can.
Yeah.
But
Much harder.
it's much, much harder.
Yeah.
And so there's a huge benefit for the church. I would also just say, from a theological perspective, the church is what Jesus Christ gave to us for his time when he is before Christ returned.
Yeah.
The church is God's instrument in this world to make a difference. And so, there are just so many benefits to us as individuals, but communally, the difference that people coming together, focused on making disciples, focused on doing justice and extending love into the world. There's so much more good that can be done in a faith community than we can just on our own.
Yeah. That's good. No,
But how would you answer that?
I think a lot of it would revolve around the community and recognizing that we're a part of something bigger in my eyes. I think the personal priority comes from a seeking, and if I were a teenager, or when I was a teenager, part of that happened just like, oh, well, I'm going to youth group, I'm seeking. But as I got to college and stuff like that, I started learning more what seeking looked like, and I had to answer some of those questions myself. But I found my priorities started lying in it as it became more relevant in my life. But the way it became more relevant were because of the relationships I had built at church, because people were showing me practical ways to not just share my faith, but also to experience faith, like having faith moments up on a rooftop, hammering with a friend, and you know what I mean? Or having these moments of worship that you're really pouring your life out and stuff like that. It was almost kind of like proof to the pudding, what everybody kind of says. And as it was proven, the priority for me became so much heavier, but I would encourage it more so. Like if you hadn't had those experiences, I think I would just encourage it out of a sense of, we have to practice and we have to put ourselves in spaces to experience and come to know Christ. And if we don't make that a priority, it's always going to be hard. It's always going to be hard to settle in on that. Do you know what I mean? So to have those experiences in worship, to be able to go deeper in faith, to seek God with other people, those are ways that you practice your faith, and God will show himself to you through those things.
Community, there's just, there's something almost undefinable about it. For example, as soon as we finish this podcast, I'm going to be with a group of people that are coming to the church to pray for a very dear friend of theirs who actually used to be a church member but has moved away, who is having some very serious surgery today, going through a very serious cancer. And so could they do that on their own at their homes?
Sure.
Yeah, of course they could. And they probably are and will.
Yeah.
But coming together, they're in unity like that, to be with one another, there is encouragement that comes from that. There's also sort of the sharing of the burden of what they're going through, praying for their friend. All of that sort of comes together in community, and God's Spirit gets in there somehow and does incredible things.
For sure.
And so, there's just so many reasons for community, and putting Christ first. It's going to lead us down the path that's going to lead us to abundant life.
Yeah.
So priorities are important, and but we do have to make them and think about them and live into them. So
that's right, and it's an important practice to stop and think. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we get caught up in just going to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and sometimes that's where our priorities start slipping. Is as we're just like, oh, I go from this to this to this to this. Where am I leaving time for?
Oh yeah,
what's priority of my life. I think about that even in a family concepts. I remember during COVID, one of the hidden blessings behind COVID was that I got to spend so much time with family there. And you might hear some people.
Yeah. Well, let's wind this up real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. We got some people coming in for a service we're doing here, and so God bless you. We'll be back next week. So,
all right, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Y'all take care.
All right. Bye-bye.